Welcome to Gospel Tangents. I'm your host, Rick Bennett. Please consider donating or purchasing a transcript by going to our website, gospeltangents.com/shop. You'll help support other documentaries and podcasts such as this. Steve Christensen was killed October 15, 1985, when he picked up a package outside his office. It was a pipe bomb, and it blew up with a bunch of concrete nails, killing him instantly. It was a horrible scene. Curt Bench describes how he found out about it driving to work, and that he immediately called his friend Mark Hofmann to warn him about a bomber out there. A few hours later, Kathy Sheets also picked up another bomb from Mark Hofmann, and she was killed instantly. Her husband, Gary Sheets, had been partners with Steve Christensen. Many wondered if this was some sort of a financial deal. Was it a mafia plot? Or was it something to do with Mormon documents, as both men had experience with those? Let's listen to Curt Bench tells us about how the news unfolded to him. Let's talk a little bit about some of the other people. Who are the other, either high-profile people or even the people that I believe you knew Steve Christensen. He was one of the people that was killed.
Yes.
Let's talk about Steve. Tell us a little bit about him.
Steve. I was doing business with him when I was at the downtown Deseret Book. That's where I started doing the used and rare books full time. Before that, I had managed a couple of Deseret Books branch stores and had done that as a sideline, used and out of print and so on. And then it just grew so big that I started doing it full time at the downtown store. We were actually a store within a store. And I managed that. And so that's when I got to know Steve, as I recall. I don't think I knew him before then, but he just had this insatiable hunger for books and for Mormon history, and he had incredible files. He had entire filing cabinets full of research material that he had gathered, and he read voraciously. He was a really good guy, sense of humor. He was just a real personable guy, very knowledgeable. He knew what he wanted. And he bought a lot of books from me. And eventually, when things went south for him financially, CFS, where he worked, and that figures into the whole story. Coordinated Financial Services, as I recall the name of it.
And what did he do there?
And he was one of the executives there. He was partners with Gary Sheets, who also figures into the story, because it was Gary Sheets' wife who was also killed by a bomb set by Hofmann.
Now, is this like a stock market?
It was a financial company. They did investments and so on, and they eventually went bankrupt. But Steve left before that all happened, went on his own, and that's when he had his office in the Judge Building downtown Salt Lake. But I talked to Steve many times, went to his office, helped him get books, but eventually, as I was saying earlier, he had financial difficulties because of his connection there with CFS and getting started on his own and so on. And so he felt like he needed to liquidate his library. And so I actually helped him sell a lot of his personal library before things...
with his financial business.
Yeah. And so I would consider Steve a friend, although we didn't, ever become close friends where we talked all the time. But he was a very good customer, and I respected him greatly and really liked him, and we had frequent conversations, and he was just very open about everything, would let you borrow whatever you wanted, as far as research material, or he was a very generous person. He gave away lots of books.
Now, is he related? I know there's a big Utah clothing store, Mr. Mack, and I think Mac Christensen. Is he related to him?
Yeah, Mac is his father.
Okay.
Yeah, Steve worked for his dad for a long time, and then left that business, the clothing business, and went into financial services.
And I believe Mac does something with the Tabernacle Choir, or he used to.
Mac was president of the choir for a while.
Okay.
for several years.
And I know a lot of people, especially if you're from Utah, have seen Mac's, Mr. Mac
Oh yeah,
commercials.
yeah, you can't miss them.
I bought my suits from Mr. Mac.
Right, he's a
So-
great guy. He was a very generous man and has been a good friend as well.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about Kathy Sheets.
Yeah, I didn't ever know her. It was only later after she was the second victim on that fateful October 15th, 1985. And so I didn't ever have the pleasure of meeting her, but I've only heard really good things about her. A wonderful human being. But she figured into the whole Hofmann scheme, and as you know, it's a very long, complicated story, and it's difficult to get to the heart of it. But she was just a victim of his machinations as he's trying to buy time and to throw the authorities and whoever off the scent, so to speak. It was a diversion, and which makes it all the more cold-blooded.
Mm-hmm.
But Steve was his first victim, and that was that morning, and then she was early afternoon. And then, well, I don't know how much background you want, but that day, I talked to Mark on the phone the day of the bombings.
Oh, really?
Several times, probably 6 or 7 times. And I called first to warn him about the bombing at that point, because there was a lot on the news. I was actually driving to work that morning, and they said there was a bomb that had gone off in the Judge building. It was just a few blocks from where I worked, and they even, as I recall, gave the office number and said a young businessman had been killed. Well, I only knew one person in the Judge building, and that was Steve Christensen. So as soon as I got to my office at work, I looked up in my directory under his name, and there was that office number in the Judge building, and I was just sick physically. I mean, it was horrible. And so I felt that I needed to confirm. They didn't give a name on the news, so just so happened that Matt Christensen's store, the main store, was in the ZCMI Center where Deseret Book also was, and I would see him and say hello down there. And so I ran down to his store, and he was talking to 2 men. I don't know who they were, but there were tears streaming down his face. So that
Matt
was
Christensen's
Max.
face. Mm-hmm.
That's when I knew that it was Steve.
Mm.
So I went back and called Mark Hofmann's phone, and one thing about him is you could never just reach him on the phone. You either had to leave a message on the machine or talk to his wife. He would always call you back. You could never just call him. And so I got the answering machine, and I said, Mark, this is Curt. This is an emergency. Call me back immediately as soon as you get this. And a short time later, he called and just kind of lightheartedly said, Curt, this is Mark. You said it was an emergency, but then everything's an emergency with you. Just making a joke. And then I told him what had happened, and that Steve Christensen had been killed, and there was a sharp intake of breath, and what? Like he was genuinely shocked. And I told him everything I'd heard, and it was as if he'd never heard a thing. And I warned him, told him to get his family out of the house, to go, get into hiding, whatever, because we didn't know what was going on. And
So because I know originally it seems like, because Steve was a financial thing, there was a lot of people that thought, well, this must be something to do with his finances. But you originally thought this has something to do with...
Well, I didn't know.
Oh, okay.
Nobody knew. And that very day there was speculation about, did it have something to do with Mormon documents? Because, Steve had been in the news with, I'm trying to remember about the news part, but certainly it was known that he had been involved in trying to get the salamander letter, and so.
So you made the connection that you thought it could have been?
Well, it could have been, yeah. But there was speculation early on about, was this business related, because there were angry investors with the Sheets company, CFS, and then after the let me get back real quick. So I told Mark, let's stay in touch. So then when there was a second bombing, and it was Kathy Sheets, who was married to Gary Sheets of CFS, Steve's old boss or partner. I can't remember if, I think they were partners, but so then it seemed like it must be business related. And there was there was all kinds of speculation. Even later we find out some wondered if it was the mafia or, just angry investors or, what the heck was going on. Nobody knew. And so I talked to him several times that day. And as I looked back, I could see that, by the questions he asked me, he wondered about how this was playing out in the media and with what people were saying, and well, what are they saying, and is this so? After the second bombing, I remember him saying something about, well, it must be business related, and I said, well, not necessarily. It could be Mormon documents. Gary Sheets had some involvement or knowledge of the salamander letter, and there were some connections there. And so I said, who knows? And I said, you need to get your family out. And he goes, okay, I will. But yeah, we talked several times that day, and in retrospect, I can see how I was kind of his sounding board to see how his scheme was working.
Did he answer his phone that day?
No, he always called me back. Yeah, I don't think it's possible. Yeah, although he did have a car phone. I think
really?
Back then, yeah, I think so.
It was a little big brick, right?
I don't know how those worked. No, it's possible I could have gotten him once that day because that was a real dramatic thing. But generally speaking, you couldn't just call him up and get him. In fact, a lot of times I had to go over to his house. He lived a mile or mile and a half from me, and in fact, one of the big ways that I was involved with Steve and him is Steve needed me to convey some information to Mark, and so I literally went over to his house and talked to him, which I had to do frequently because it was too frustrating to try to get him on the phone. Sometimes it was just easier to go see him.
Oh, wow.
And, we did things socially there. We had dinner with him and his wife a number of times. Even had hot tub parties, which we didn't go to those, but yeah, we considered the Hofmann's friends and did things socially as well as a lot of business.
I hope you enjoyed our discussion with Curt Bench. In our next discussion, we're going to talk about a second day of bombings. This time, Mark blew himself up. Was it an accident or did it happen on purpose? I'll also ask Curt, was he fearful for his own safety?
We lived in the county, and someone suggested that we have county sheriffs go out to my house and look for bombs. And so I sent my family to my mother-in-law's place so that our house would be vacant. And so I was there with 2 sheriff's deputies, and we were going through my house room by room, in the garage, in the yard.
Click here to subscribe, click here for a transcript, and over here you'll see some other videos that we've done here on YouTube. We hope you'll use this as a valuable resource to learn more about Mormon history.